This is a trivial event for someone at the bottom. That's what my mother said to me, and for a second I couldn't breathe. I just stood there in my apartment, staring at the wall with my phone still in my hand, trying to understand how my own mother could say something like that. She wasn't talking about a stranger. She wasn't talking about a coworker or a neighbor. She was talking about me, her daughter. The daughter who had spent her entire life trying to earn her approval. But honestly, that wasn't even the worst part. The real shock wasn't that my parents refused to come to my wedding. It was where they chose to go instead. While I walked down the aisle hoping to see their faces in the crowd, they were thousands of miles away in Hawaii, raising glasses, laughing, and celebrating my sister like I didn't exist. And somehow, that still wasn't the moment that broke me, because a few days later my father called. And what he asked for was so selfish, so unbelievable, that it shattered a lie I'd been holding on to for nearly 30 years. But the truth is, that phone call didn't come out of nowhere. It was the result of years of favoritism. Years of excuses, years of hoping things would finally change. They never did. And if you want to understand how my wedding became the day my family abandoned me, you have to go back to where it all started. The truth is, that phone call didn't destroy my family. It just exposed what had been there all along. My name is Natalie Mitchell. I'm 31 years old and I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. From the outside, we looked like a normal family. Nice neighborhood, clean lawn, perfect Christmas cards. The kind of family people point to and say, they've got it all together. My parents, Robert and Linda, cared a lot about appearances. They wanted everyone to believe they had built the perfect life and raised successful children. The problem was, only one of us really fit that picture. My sister Jennifer. Looking back, I can't point to one moment when she became the favorite. It wasn't one moment, it was 1,000 little moments. Jennifer was charming, confident, the kind of person people noticed the second she walked into a room. Teachers loved her, neighbors talked about her, relatives couldn't stop predicting her future. By the time she was a teenager, my parents were already telling people she would become a lawyer someday. And me? I was the quiet one, the kid who spent Saturday afternoons with a sketchbook on the floor. I could spend hours drawing storefronts, old buildings, and places that only existed in my imagination. I wasn't getting into trouble. I wasn't failing classes. I was just different. Different from the future my parents had planned. I still remember bringing home a drawing I had worked on for weeks. I was about 10 years old, and I couldn't wait to show my dad. I thought maybe this time he'd be proud. He looked at it for a couple of seconds. That's nice, Natalie. Then he went right back to talking about Jennifer's latest academic award. At the time, it didn't seem like a big moment. Just one conversation, one small disappointment. But that's the thing about favoritism. It rarely shows up all at once. It shows up in little ways, over and over again. When Jennifer succeeded, everyone celebrated. When I succeeded, the room barely noticed. And every year, I kept telling myself the next achievement would be different. The next report card, the next competition, the next milestone. What I didn't understand back then was that I wasn't chasing success. I was chasing something much harder to get. I wanted to be seen. And no matter how hard I tried, Jennifer was always standing in the spotlight while I stayed somewhere just outside the glow. For a long time, I told myself things would change if I just worked harder. Kids do that. We look for reasons to explain things that don't make sense. And most of the time, we end up blaming ourselves. Every time my parents overlooked me, I came up with an excuse. Maybe my drawings weren't good enough. Maybe my grades could have been better. Maybe I just needed one big achievement that would finally make them look at me the way they looked at Jennifer. So I kept trying. When I was 12, I won a regional art competition. Schools from all over the county participated, and I spent weeks working on my submission. When the letter arrived saying I'd won first place, I thought this was it. I remember running into the house with that certificate in my hands. My heart was racing. I could already picture my parents smiling. Instead, my mom glanced at it and said, "That's nice." Then she asked if I'd called Jennifer to congratulate her for making honor roll. That was it. I stood there waiting for something more. A smile. A hug. Anything. It never came. Looking back, the moment probably lasted less than a minute. But disappointment has a way of sticking with you. As the years went on, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Whenever Jennifer achieved something, it became a family event. When she got accepted into a summer program, my parents hosted a barbecue. When she won a science competition, they called relatives in 3 different states. When she earned a scholarship, they framed the letter. Meanwhile, my accomplishments drifted through the house like background noise. Acknowledged, then forgotten. I remember my first art exhibition at school when I was 15. The gym was packed with parents carrying coffee cups and cameras, walking from display to display, while students proudly stood beside their work. I kept watching the entrance. Every time the door opened, my stomach tightened. Maybe that's them. Maybe they're just late. Maybe traffic was bad. Hour after hour, I waited. They never showed up. Eventually, I stopped looking. I stood there smiling while other families took pictures together, and all I could think about was how badly I wanted that too. That's what hurt the most. Not that strangers came to support me. Teachers came. Classmates came. People I barely knew stopped to compliment my work. What hurt was realizing complete strangers seemed more interested in my dreams than my own parents. By then, the message was becoming clear. Jennifer wasn't just the favorite. She was the future, at least in my parents' eyes. I overheard conversations they never meant for me to hear. My mom telling neighbors Jennifer would make the family proud. My dad talking about medical school like it was the best investment he could make. Meanwhile, people barely remembered what grade I was in. After a while, I stopped sharing things. I stopped expecting excitement. When report cards came home, I left them on the counter and walked away. When teachers praised my work, I kept it to myself. Because eventually, protecting yourself becomes a habit. By high school, art wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was the one place where I felt seen. Nobody compared me to Jennifer. Nobody asked why I wasn't more ambitious. Nobody made me feel like I was falling behind. I could just create. And for a little while, I could forget how lonely home felt. Ironically, the more successful I became, the wider the gap seemed to grow. Teachers encouraged me. Local artists noticed my work. One instructor told me I had real talent and should seriously consider graphic design. I remember driving home feeling excited for the first time in a long time. For once, I imagined a future that belonged to me. Not Jennifer, not my parents, mine. When I told my father, he barely looked up from the newspaper. "Art's fine," he said, "but you need something practical." Then he spent the next 20 minutes talking about Jennifer's latest opportunity. And that's when something started to crack. Not all at once. Just a small fracture spreading a little farther each year. Because deep down, I was beginning to understand something I'd spent years trying to avoid. The problem wasn't that my parents didn't notice my accomplishments. The problem was that they'd already decided whose accomplishments mattered. And it wasn't mine. Still, I couldn't let go completely. I wish I could tell you I stopped caring. I didn't. I still hoped. I still believed there might be one moment big enough to change everything. One achievement. One milestone. One reason for them to finally look at me with pride. What I didn't understand back then was that hope can keep you moving forward. But it can also keep you trapped. And for years, that's exactly where I stayed. Trapped in the belief that one day, my parents would finally see me. By the time I left for college, I honestly thought distance might help. Not fix everything. Just enough to make life feel lighter. I wasn't naive enough to believe a few hours away from home could erase years of feeling invisible. But part of me thought that if I built something of my own, my parents might finally see me differently. So I threw myself into graphic design, and for the first time in my life, it felt like I could breathe. I stayed up late working on layouts, redesigning logos, and sketching ideas that probably made sense only to me. The difference was that nobody laughed at it. Nobody told me it was a phase. My professors treated it like real work. And that meant more than I can explain. During my first year, I met Karen Brooks. Karen had this energy that filled a room before she even spoke. She could make a complete stranger feel like an old friend in 5 minutes. But what mattered most was that she saw through people, especially me. She always knew when a call from home had ruined my day. She knew when I was pretending I was fine. And she never let me make myself smaller just to keep other people comfortable. Then there was David Parker. He was a teaching assistant in one of my design classes. Quiet, thoughtful, and impossible to impress, at least at first. If my work wasn't good, he'd tell me. If it had potential, he'd push me harder. He made me explain every decision until I finally understood my own voice as a designer. For the first time, someone looked at my work and saw a future. That kind of belief changes you. By junior year, I was taking freelance jobs around Grand Rapids, small businesses, coffee shops, local boutiques, a family bakery that needed a new logo. The pay wasn't great, but every check felt like proof. Proof that I could stand on my own. Proof that my dreams weren't a mistake. Every now and then, I still sent updates home. I wish I hadn't. When I landed an internship at a design studio, my mom said, "That's nice, honey." Then immediately started talking about Jennifer's internship at a teaching hospital. When one of my designs got featured in a local industry blog, my dad replied with a single sentence about Jennifer's latest clinical rotation. I remember staring at that email for a long time. Then I closed my laptop and locked myself in the bathroom. I thought Karen wouldn't notice. I was wrong. A few minutes later, she knocked on the door. "Open up, Natalie." When I finally did, she took one look at me and said, "They don't deserve you." I wanted to believe her. Part of me did, but another part of me was still that 12-year-old girl holding a certificate in the kitchen, waiting for somebody to be proud. After graduation, life started getting better. I got hired by an agency in Grand Rapids. I got my own apartment. I started building a career I actually loved. And somewhere along the way, David and I stopped being friends and became something more. He celebrated things other people missed. A finished project, a difficult client, a new idea I was afraid to pitch. With David, I didn't have to fight to be seen. One evening, we were walking along the Grand River when he suddenly stopped. I remember thinking something was wrong. Instead, he pulled out a ring. His hands were shaking. Mine probably were too. And before he even finished the question, I said yes. For a while, I let myself believe this wedding might finally change things. Maybe my parents would show up. Maybe my mother would cry when she saw me in my dress. Maybe my father would walk me down the aisle and choose me for once. It sounds foolish now, but hope usually does when you look back on it. And back then, I still had just enough hope left to believe my family might finally be there when it mattered most. Looking back now, I think that's what hurts the most. Not that I was wrong, but how badly I wanted to be right. David and I spent months planning that wedding. Not because we wanted anything extravagant. We didn't. What mattered was bringing together the people we loved and celebrating the life we were about to build. At least, that's what it meant to me. One of my favorite parts was designing the invitations. Night after night, I sat at our dining room table adjusting fonts, changing colors, obsessing over details most people would never notice. Every envelope carried a little piece of hope, especially the ones addressed to my parents and Jennifer. Even after everything, I still imagined my mother helping me straighten my dress before the ceremony. I imagined my father standing beside me for photos. I imagined Jennifer making jokes at the reception and getting everyone laughing. I know how that sounds now, but when you've spent your whole life waiting for love, you learn how to survive on possibilities. A few days before the wedding, my phone rang. It was my mother, and I remember smiling when I saw her name. For a second, I thought maybe she was finally excited. Maybe she wanted to talk about the ceremony. Maybe she wanted to know what time to arrive. Instead, her voice was cold. "Natalie, we're not coming." The words hit so hard my brain couldn't process them. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it didn't feel real. Then she explained. They were flying to Hawaii. Jennifer and her fiancé were celebrating their engagement, and my parents had decided they needed to be there instead. I stood in my kitchen listening while every sentence made things worse. Then she said the words I'll never forget. "This is a trivial event for someone at the bottom." For a second, I thought I'd heard her wrong. Someone at the bottom. Her daughter. The daughter getting married in less than a week. The daughter who had spent years trying to earn her approval. After that, everything felt quiet. I don't remember hanging up. I don't remember moving. I just remember sitting there feeling something crack inside me. When David got home, he found me at the kitchen table. I told him what happened, and he wrapped his arms around me while I cried harder than I had in years. Part of me wanted to call back, to argue, to beg, to ask how they could choose Jennifer again. But deep down, I already knew the answer, because they had been choosing her my entire life. The wedding day arrived anyway. Funny how life keeps moving even when your heart doesn't. I put on the dress. I smiled for pictures. I walked down the aisle. And for one brief moment, I looked across the room at the seats reserved for my family. They were empty. They stayed empty through the ceremony, through dinner, Through every toast, I kept telling myself I could handle it. And honestly, I wasn't alone. David was there. Karen was there. David's parents showed me more kindness than my own family ever had. But late that night, after the music stopped and guests started leaving, I made the mistake of checking my phone. That's when I saw the video. Palm trees moving in the Hawaiian breeze. Champagne glasses raised in celebration. My mother laughing. My father smiling. Jennifer standing beside her fiancé. The caption said, "Celebrating our star in paradise." I watched it once, then again. Then one more time. Not because I wanted to, because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My wedding hadn't just been forgotten. It had been replaced. And standing there in my wedding dress, staring at that screen, I finally understood something I'd spent years refusing to accept. I wasn't waiting for my family to choose me. I was waiting for them to become people they had never been. I wish I could tell you that was the moment I finally gave up on them. It wasn't. As painful as my wedding day had been, part of me still believed there had to be a limit, a line they wouldn't cross. I found out a week later how wrong I was. David and I were settling into married life, unpacking gifts and finding places for things around the apartment. For the first time in years, I was trying to focus on what I had instead of everything I'd lost. Then my phone rang. It was my father. And the second I saw his name, my stomach tightened. For a moment, I thought maybe he was calling to apologize. Maybe he'd finally realized what he'd done. He hadn't. He got straight to the point. "Natalie, we need to talk about the loan." I remember frowning. "What loan?" The way he said it made me feel like I was supposed to know exactly what he meant. Like I owed him something. Then he explained. He and my mother expected me to contribute $30,000 toward Jennifer's wedding. According to him, they had helped pay for my education years ago, and now it was my turn to give something back. I just sat there, silent. Not because I was thinking about it, because I genuinely couldn't believe what I was hearing. They skipped my wedding. They chose Hawaii over their own daughter, and now they wanted me to help pay for Jennifer's. The audacity of it was almost unbelievable. My father kept talking about family responsibility, doing the right thing, helping your sister. The usual things people say when they want something from you. And while he talked, something strange happened. The hurt started fading, not completely, but enough for something else to take its place. Clarity. Because for the first time, I wasn't listening like a daughter desperate for approval. I was listening like an outsider. And from that perspective, everything looked different. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't bad timing. It wasn't thoughtlessness. It wasn't one mistake. It was a choice. The same choice they had been making for years. The same choice they made at my wedding. The same choice they made every time Jennifer succeeded and I disappeared into the background. And sitting there with the phone against my ear, I realized something I should have understood a long time ago. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they had chosen her anyway. After I hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. Every word. Every excuse, every accusation. David didn't push me to talk. He just sat beside me, close enough that I knew I wasn't alone. Sometimes that's exactly what you need. After a while, I got up and started digging through old folders, bank statements, loan records, payment confirmations, anything connected to college. I've always been careful with money. Back then, I worked freelance jobs, picked up extra work whenever I could, and stretched every paycheck as far as it would go. I knew what I'd paid. I knew what I'd sacrificed. But I needed to see it, in black and white. So I kept looking, hour after hour, page after page. And then I found it. Paid in full, not by my parents, by me. Every payment came from my account. Every balance had been cleared years earlier. There was no hidden debt, no family loan. No sacrifice Robert and Linda had quietly made behind the scenes. There was only a lie, a deliberate one. I remember staring at the final confirmation page for a long time, and that's when something cold settled in my chest. It wasn't shock, not anymore. It was understanding. My father hadn't mixed up the details. He hadn't forgotten what happened. He knew exactly what he was saying, and somehow that hurt more, because it meant he had counted on something. He counted on me feeling guilty. He counted on me feeling obligated. He counted on me wanting his approval badly enough that I wouldn't question him. That's what finally broke through the fog. For years, I'd been looking at individual moments. A comment here, A disappointment there, one broken promise after another. But sitting there with those records in front of me, I could finally see the whole pattern. All of it, at once. They hadn't just favored Jennifer. They had learned how to use my love for them against me. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't relying on feelings anymore. I had proof. And once you see the truth that clearly, it's impossible to go back to the story you've been telling yourself. For years, I had been asking the wrong question. Why did my parents love Jennifer more? Why did they celebrate her victories and ignore mine? Why was nothing I ever did enough? I spent so much time searching for answers that I never stopped to ask whether those answers even mattered. Sitting there with those documents spread across the table, something finally clicked. The truth was actually simple, painful, but simple. They were never going to change. Not because they couldn't, because they didn't want to. And the strange thing is, that realization didn't hit me like a lightning bolt. It arrived quietly, like the end of an argument I'd been having with myself for years. I thought about the empty seats at my wedding, the video from Hawaii, the fake loan. All those years I spent convincing myself there had to be some explanation I wasn't seeing. Some reason that would make everything make sense. But there wasn't. There never was. There was only a reality I'd spent most of my life trying not to look at. I had been chasing a version of my parents that existed only in my hopes. Not in real life, not in their actions, just in my imagination. The people I kept waiting for were never the people standing in front of me. And for the first time, I stopped trying to earn something they had never intended to give. Oddly enough, I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was just tired. Tired of proving myself. Tired of hoping. Tired of carrying a burden that had never belonged to me in the first place. Because that's what I'd been doing all those years. Carrying responsibility for a relationship I didn't break. Trying to fix something I didn't damage. Trying to earn a love that shouldn't have required earning. And somewhere underneath all that exhaustion, I felt something new. Not forgiveness, not peace, not yet. Just a small glimpse of freedom. The kind that appears when you finally stop chasing something that was never yours to win. That feeling stayed with me for days. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. For most of my life, almost every decision came back to the same question. What will my family think? Even when they ignored me, even when they hurt me, even when they made it painfully clear that Jennifer would always come first. Part of me was still looking over my shoulder, hoping for approval that never arrived. But something had changed. The fake loan didn't just expose a lie, it exposed the entire relationship. For the first time, I stopped looking at individual moments. I stopped treating each disappointment like a separate event. Instead, I saw the pattern. The overlooked achievements, the broken promises, the endless comparisons, the guilt disguised as family obligation. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. A few days later, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open in front of me. David was nearby, giving me space but staying close enough that I could feel his support without either of us saying a word. I stared at the blank screen for a long time, not because I didn't know what to write, because I knew exactly what needed to be said. And honestly, that was the scary part. The email wasn't angry. It wasn't dramatic. There were no insults, no accusations, no long explanation. I'd spent too many years trying to make my parents understand. I wasn't going to do that anymore. Instead, I wrote the truth. I told them their actions had shown me exactly where I stood in their lives. I told them I was done carrying the weight of their favoritism, their expectations, and their demands. And finally, I told them not to contact me again. When I finished, my finger hovered over the send button. My heart was pounding. Not because I was afraid of losing them, because I was letting go of something I'd carried since childhood. Hope. Hope that one day they would become the parents I needed. For a few seconds, I just sat there staring at the screen. Then I clicked send. The email disappeared. The room went quiet. And I waited. For guilt. For regret. For panic. For that overwhelming feeling that I'd made a terrible mistake. But none of it came. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Not because I had won, not because they had lost, but because for the first time in my life, I stopped choosing their approval over my own well-being. And for the first time in my life, I chose myself. Choosing myself didn't magically fix everything. If anything, it just made everything quiet. For the first few days, I kept expecting my phone to light up. A guilt trip, an angry message, maybe a long email about how ungrateful I was. That was usually how things worked in my family. They hurt you first, then acted hurt when you finally responded. But this time, nothing came. No apology, no explanation, no attempt to understand. And honestly, that silence told me everything I needed to know. What I didn't realize was that other people had been watching for years. I just wasn't the only one seeing it anymore. One afternoon, my cousin Susan called. The moment I heard her voice, I could tell something was different. She asked if I was okay. Not in the casual way people usually ask, in the way people ask when they already know the answer. Then she told me the family had started talking, not gossiping, more like finally admitting what everyone had been seeing for a long time. They knew my parents skipped my wedding. They knew about Hawaii. And when Susan heard about the $30,000, she couldn't believe it. Natalie, she said, that's not family, that's using you. I still remember sitting there in silence after she said it, because for years I'd wondered if maybe I was too sensitive, too emotional, too jealous of Jennifer. I'd spent so much time questioning myself that hearing someone say it out loud felt almost unreal. And Susan wasn't the only one. Little by little, people started seeing things differently. Aunts stopped inviting my parents to family dinners. Uncles stopped returning calls. Even people around town seemed to look at them differently. In a place like Grand Rapids, people remember things. They remember who shows up, and they remember who doesn't. My parents had spent years protecting a perfect image. But eventually, the truth found its way through the cracks. I heard later that Jennifer's engagement started feeling some of that pressure too. Brian's family had questions, hard questions. Why did her parents skip her sister's wedding? Why did nobody seem bothered by it? Why had Jennifer stayed silent? For the first time, I wasn't the one trying to explain what happened. I wasn't defending myself. I wasn't asking people to understand. The truth had finally walked into the room on its own. And all I had to do was step aside and let it stand there. For the first time in a very long time, my life stopped revolving around my family. That might not sound like much, but for me, it changed everything. When you've spent years measuring your worth against someone else's rejection, letting go doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels unfamiliar, like learning how to walk again after sitting still for too long. At the beginning, I didn't know what to do with all that space, all that energy. All those thoughts that were no longer focused on fixing a relationship that couldn't be fixed. Then life quietly started filling the gap. I threw myself into work, not because I was trying to prove anything anymore, because I genuinely loved it. Projects that used to feel stressful started feeling exciting. I took more creative risks. I spoke up in meetings. I trusted my instincts instead of second-guessing myself. It was like all the energy I'd spent chasing approval was finally available for my own life. David noticed it before I did. One night after dinner, we were sitting on the couch when he looked at me and smiled. You know, he said, you laugh more now. I laughed when he said it. Then I realized he was right. Not because my problems had disappeared, but because I wasn't carrying the same weight anymore. Around that time, something else started changing. David and I began talking seriously about the future. Not the vague kind of future people talk about, the real one. A home someday, holiday traditions, family dinners, the kind of life we wanted to build together. A life built intentionally, not inherited. Then one morning, I found myself staring at a pregnancy test on the bathroom counter. For a second, my heart stopped. Then it started racing. Then it stopped again. I must have read the instructions 3 times. I knew what the results said. I just couldn't believe it. When I showed David, he looked at me for a moment before pulling me into the biggest hug I'd ever had. Neither of us said much. We didn't need to. Some moments are simply too big for words. As the weeks passed, the reality slowly settled in. There was a tiny life growing inside me. A child who would someday look to me for safety, for guidance, for love. And unexpectedly, that realization healed something inside me. Because for years, I'd wondered what was wrong with me, why I wasn't enough. Why my parents couldn't love me the way I needed them to. But sitting there with my hand resting on my stomach, I couldn't imagine treating my child the way I'd been treated. Not because I was extraordinary, because love should never have been that difficult. Karen practically became an honorary aunt overnight. She showed up with baby clothes, parenting books, and enough excitement for 3 people. David's parents weren't far behind. Patricia started knitting blankets. Thomas offered advice nobody asked for, but somehow everyone enjoyed hearing. Their happiness surrounded us, not out of obligation, not because we shared blood, because they genuinely cared. And that's when I finally understood something that had taken me decades to learn. Family isn't the people who demand your loyalty. Family is the people who show up. The people who celebrate your happiness like it's their own. The people who sit beside you during the hard seasons and never make you earn their love. For most of my life, I thought I was losing a family. What I didn't realize was that I was building one. And for the first time, the future felt bigger than the past. A few months later, I held my daughter for the first time, Olivia. Even now, years later, I can still picture that moment perfectly. The room was quiet. Just the soft hum of hospital monitors and the tiny sounds of a newborn discovering the world for the first time. David sat beside me looking exhausted and emotional at the same time. He couldn't stop smiling, neither could I. I looked down at Olivia and felt something I had never felt before. Not just love, understanding. For most of my life, I had been searching for answers. Why wasn't I enough? Why did my parents keep choosing Jennifer? Why did I spend so many years trying to earn something that should have been given freely? And then I looked at Olivia. Suddenly those questions felt smaller, not because they didn't matter, because I finally understood they were never mine to solve. She didn't have to earn my love. She didn't have to compete for it. She didn't have to become someone else to deserve it. She already did. From the moment I held her. That was the lesson I wish I had learned decades earlier. Real love isn't a reward. It's not handed out to the smartest child, the most successful child, or the favorite child. Real love shows up. It listens. It stays. As Olivia grew, David and I made a quiet promise to each other. We would celebrate who she was, not who we wanted her to become, and we would never make her fight for a place in our hearts. Somewhere along the way, I realized my story had never really been about rejection. It was about learning my own value. My parents' choices shaped part of my life, but they didn't define it. The people who stood beside me did. David, Karen, Thomas and Patricia, Susan, and now Olivia. For years, I believed family was something you were born into. Today, I know better. Family is built by the people who choose you, the people who stay, the people who show up when it matters, the people who love you without turning that love into a test. And if there's one thing this journey taught me, it's this. Not everyone will love us the way we deserve to be loved. Sometimes, even the people we call family. We can spend years chasing approval, one more achievement, one more sacrifice, one more chance to finally be seen. But real self-worth can't depend on someone else's acceptance. Healing begins when we stop trying to change people who don't want to change, and start investing our energy in the people who genuinely care. Looking back now, I'm grateful for the life I have, not because everything turned out the way I hoped, but because I finally learned the difference between being tolerated and being truly loved. And in the end, that's what family was supposed to be all along.